Okay, I've started to record this session. So thank you for coming today. We do have a lot of things to cover, and I know Jeannie needs to get to a meeting, to the governing board meeting at 10. So we're going to get started by talking about Palatine's interest in creating bibliographic records for forthcoming titles before the items are ordered, so that patrons can place a hold, and that helps them to decide what they want to order and what they don't want to order. Jeannie, would you like to describe more about these records and why they're important?
Absolutely. I'll give you some clarification on that. So before I do, let me say how excited we are to join CCS. We're really loving it. Both my assistant director and I come from the SWAN world, so we're used to the consortial environment, and we just know it's such a huge benefit for our patrons. And our patrons are already telling us how much they really appreciate access to more materials and the bigger catalog and so on. So that's really important to us at Palatine, as I'm sure it is to all of you, because bottom line for us is member service. And so we always want to make sure we're doing what's best for our customers, members, patrons, whatever, what have you. And I'm trying to read my screen while having all of you on the screen too. So prior to joining CCS, Palatine was in the practice of adding what we call forthcoming titles to the catalog. And these were generally either one of two categories, either new movies that hadn't been released yet on DVD, but maybe they were out in the theaters, so our patrons knew about them, or new books by popular authors that weren't yet available to order, but authors had already started to market them, so patrons had heard about them. And earlier, Rachel said we would add these to the catalog to see whether or not to buy them, and that's really not accurate. We would only add things that we anticipated buying because we knew that they were popular. So our patrons really came to value that service and the ability to place the holds on the items as soon as they heard about them, because they knew that once that movie was no longer in the theaters, they would totally forget the title and wouldn't remember to place the hold later. But it was also, as a side benefit, helpful for our selectors because it did help them gauge interest in a title and know how many additional copies to order before it was released so that we could meet the patron demand right away. So it helped us in that respect, but we did not add a title if we did not think that we were going to buy it. We just would know whether or not we needed to buy multiple copies. Because again, these were mostly things that we knew were going to be popular anyway. So during the migration, CCS staff let us know that there was not a process in place to add forthcoming titles to the catalog. So they told us that our existing forthcoming bibliographic records would be migrated over, but we shouldn't add any new ones after migration. So we have stopped doing that. In fact, we stopped ordering since July, and so we haven't added any of those. But some of those records did come over, so you may have seen some in the catalog until we were able to attach items to them as the books came in. But I will say that our patrons noticed the change right away, much quicker than I thought that they would. They immediately started to find that things weren't in the catalog that they expected to be there. And, you know, patrons, they automatically assumed that the lack of a record meant that we weren't going to buy that new James Patterson. And they immediately start trying to convince us of the importance of ordering James Patterson, as if we don't know that. So they can't understand why, if we know that an item exists, that the record isn't, that we haven't already bought it and put a record in the catalog. We haven't seen it as much with the movies, and that's just because nothing's coming out in the theaters right now. But I know that once things do start to come out in the theaters, our movie buffs will also be all over this. So what we want to know today is if we can resume creating these forthcoming records. So we know that means we would have to create a bib record with an item attached. And we know that we're willing to take responsibility for the record creation and any later cleanup that might be involved in that. I know one of the issues also might be in terms of the items being holdable. Right now, we are sharing all of our new books and new DVDs with CCS libraries, so all patrons are allowed to place holds on our items. And we would certainly be willing to make those records holdable to CCS patrons, which would again have that side benefit of helping other libraries figure out, oh, look, there's 20 holds by our patrons when we ran this hold alert list. So perhaps we should buy a copy for our library. And even if the library decided not to buy it, then obviously eventually the Palatine copy would come to the patrons. But if the group would prefer, we can also make those holdable only to Palatine patrons. We are flexible in that. That's up to the group. I will say that on some very, very rare occasions, the title might not get published. So something that came out in the theaters and a bunch of people might have asked us for might not actually ever get to, put on DVD, for instance. And in those cases, after 18 months, we delete the record and we delete all the holds manually. We very rarely get any questions from patrons, but if we were, doing this and creating these records, then we would certainly take responsibility for deleting those holds if that were to come up. So that's basically what we're asking. And I'm here with our new collection services manager, Violet Jaffe, and a couple of our other staff, Christy Napolitano and Lay Deep, and we're happy to answer any questions you guys might have.
I do have one question, Jeannie. What's the minimum amount of information that you need to create one of these forthcoming records? Do you, for example, if James Patterson is talking about, a book that might be 22, but it doesn't even have a title yet, is that something that you would create a record for, like lacking title information?
I'm going to have to defer to one of my staff. And I also noticed that Shelby Reiki has also joined us to our collection services assistant manager. Shelby, can you answer that one? You're muted.
Okay. All right. Sometimes if there is no title, we do put untitled. But we usually try to at least have an ISBN too. So, sometimes they do announce that a book is coming and they don't have a title yet. So we do use that as in the field for the title, untitled.
I support this idea in principle. Are you hand typing these, like the record on the screen right now? Did you hand type that?
Yes.
Okay. Because I would say like those 100 fields are a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Especially the first.
Why is it a problem?
Well, we now have an author whose name is no DVD release information available, and that goes to the browse index for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
yeah, we've also, for movies, we've also put in one of the actors in it in the author field too in the past.
Yeah, so definitely if we needed to clean up our records and needed to enter things differently under CCS, we're open to that. This was just our local practice, but we could do whatever CCS wanted.
Sure.
Yeah, Helga?
Yeah, so I see Jamie did join us, but I thought he had a really great group of questions there. And the one that I'm wondering most about is, so I looked at the record set of these things, and obviously many of us ended up ordering most of these. So you've got this generic record in there that doesn't really have a lot of information that allows it to be overlaid. So my on order record is there plus this. How would we deal with those? Especially if the decision is made to allow everyone to place holds, which is great, Jeannie, on them. How would we deal with all of those records, something that we, obviously are trying hard to avoid. I'm having a little trouble with that.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. Like as part of the acquisitions workflow, when you actually order the title and download the records from the vendor, then import them and add them to a PO and release the PO, you generate an additional on-order item record. And likely, depending on the bibs, you're correct, they probably wouldn't overlay. So then you have 2 duplicate bibs, one with all of the holds that would have been placed by patrons, and then the record with your actual on-order item attached that's linked to your PO and then your invoice and so on. So at some point, someone would need to be responsible for merging the bib over to then the newly created one. So there would need to be some sort of process to be able to identify, again, this forthcoming title is now this on-order title, and those records need to be merged.
And without the UPC in this records, it's more difficult to identify the duplicate. You'd have to search for the title manually if you don't have the UPC yet.
And then Shelby or Jeannie, do you tend to create forthcoming records, for example, for different formats, such as DVD versus Blu-ray?
We do both.
You do both, okay.
Yeah. And usually when we order it, then all we do is just kind of modify that record a little bit, the bib record, as we order it. We don't really download a record to overlay onto it.
Yeah, I think
that's how we've done it in Sierra. So
yeah, many of us are ordering from Midwest Tape, and it's been Midwest Tape is working with us to put in, for instance, the preliminary vendor data field, which is consistent, which is really helpful. So yeah, I'm just that does appear maybe to be one of the bigger stumbling points to get worked out, because I agree with John. I mean, I like the idea in concept, and in the past when we were on Cersei, we tried to do something similar, but even standalone, it got a little confusing. So that seems to be one of the things to have to get worked out.
I'd like to make the case that having multiple preliminary records, while not ideal, not as big a deal as it would be when we get to the final stage, because our catalogs are scoped. Displays patrons probably are never going to see this record. And as long as I'm not responsible for cleaning up Palatine's record, I guess it doesn't really affect me. They'll be the ones, they're the ones who put it in, and they will ultimately be the ones to have to clean it up. So
I'm not sure your patrons wouldn't see it if these are only the hot titles that they're putting in. Then if your patron doesn't see it at Displays, they're going to go to all libraries and see, oh, Palatine is getting it. So they'll place a hold on that.
Sure, and it'll get sorted out eventually.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just an additional piece of acquisitions / cataloging work that has to get figured out, though.
Sure.
Yeah, and I'll reiterate, I mean, I think we're willing to do that cleanup for anything that we've created, and we just might need your help in helping us work through what that cleanup involves, because we're not pulling over on order records from any vendors right now, so we don't utilize that process, and that so we'd need help with identifying that process, but we're definitely willing to do what is necessary to make it work.
Yeah, and when it comes to acquisitions workflow, I suppose it sounds like Displays, like for going off to John, you might not be interested in adding an item record to a forthcoming bib. You might just leave the Palatine record there. But in the event that other libraries, their patrons come to them and say, hey, Palatine's ordering this, why aren't you? Where's our item record? If you create an item record not part of the acquisitions process, then you may be dealing later with 2 on-order item records, and then a process where you'd have to fit it in your workflow to then delete the item record attached to the forthcoming record, because again, that item creation from acquisitions libraries is linked to like the PO release. So it is something that we need to maybe help libraries work through if this is something we want to move forward with.
The other thing I'm just thinking of patrons placing holds, because sometimes every once in a while we will have duplicates, and some of the patrons will place a hold on both of the records so that when we merge them eventually, then the patron is in there double. I don't know if that's something to consider.
Yeah, well, would Polaris merge both holds then?
I think both holds would stay. For example, if you had the forthcoming title that was originally input and then the on order preliminary data record, if you merge those two and the patron had a hold on both, they'd have two holds then. Mm-hmm. So that is something there'd be probably, we know patrons, they're like, hold on the Blu-ray, hold on the DVD, hold on the combo set. Like there's a lot of holds everywhere. So that would be something to consider, is that there may be some hold cleanup.
I also noticed, looking at the file, that the type of materials for most of the AV was book. So I don't know if Palatine's previous catalog made any kind of distinction in format in the display, but if you're going to be doing these as AV, they should display the correct material type.
Yeah, I think that was a migration error.
Yeah, and I think if this is something we'd like to move forward with, we'd need to create some standards for these records so that they display correctly to patrons and that staff knew how to create them. So we need to update likely our bib standards to include a section for this. Yeah, Helga.
Oh, just additionally, I mean, if this moves forward and other patrons start seeing these, I mean, at our library, we do order very far in advance, but our records only appear when it's actually able to be ordered. So while we may be 3 or 4 months ahead, we're not as far ahead as these records may be in terms of availability. I assume that once other libraries' patrons start to see these, they may also start to expect something like that, or our librarians would start to expect something like that. So I think, again, from Jamie's email, the idea that we would have to consider guidelines for potentially for one forthcoming bib, as opposed to, I mean, do we really want like 5 fourth or 6 or however many fourth? You seem to think that's not an issue, but I guess I don't totally agree with that. I think that could be potentially really confusing for staff and patrons. Like, what do I put a hold on? Which one?
So why wouldn't there just be one forthcoming bib?
Well, I mean,
whichever library created it first, and then others would attach to it.
Yeah, currently we are a library that is using acquisitions, and I use vendor records. So when I load them, it recognizes that there's a record in there that matches my load. So my items go directly onto that single record where 20 other libraries are on. But again, going back to these records, and this could simply be a matter of adjusting the information that's in these bibliographic records, but my item would not, without manual intervention, would not end up on this record. And I'm not really in a position to spend, that much time with provisional records, figuring out which bib does this go on, and then manually adding item records. It would really impact my workflow. So.
Okay, so that's helpful, thank you.
Yeah.
It does sound like, making sure that our forthcoming records are as clean as they can be and, have as many fields filled in might eliminate some of that.
This record doesn't have a UPC that we're looking at. Is there a point in time that you actually add the UPC, or do you create purchase orders without adding that to the bibliographic record?
We haven't been adding UPCs when we order it.
But again, we could.
I mean, it's something we could do. Yeah, it's something we could do.
Because that's part of the problem that I see, is that the record would need the UPC in order for it to deduplicate properly.
Yeah, and again, it's a different world being a standalone, and we didn't need that until later when we were actually cataloging. But if we need it now, absolutely.
But when it was ordered, it would stop being one of these forthcoming bibs, right? It would be a regular on order PDR, which would follow our normal on order PDR standards. Right?
Right, right. It's just like, again, if you think about DVDs, if the latest Marvel movie is coming out in the theaters and people want to place a hold on that, we don't know what the UPC is yet.
Yeah, so these records are for items that cannot actually be ordered by a library yet. So the actual item may not exist at this point in time. And then when the item is finally available for pre-order, this forthcoming record would need to be merged or upgraded to like our preliminary data standards.
Actually, that was something we used to do. Is that when we did order it, because we were told in the cart of like DVDs or Blu-rays that we were ordering, that this was a forthcoming record, so that we knew that it was going to be, you know, and we used to so what we used to do is we used to merge those records together, because we knew they were identified at the time of ordering.
I think, I think some of the problems that Helga's mentioning with like her patrons putting holds on these and not ending up on her records might be helped if Palatine or whoever used these records did make them holdable just to their own patrons. That might prevent some of these other issues.
And then do you think there is then any subsequent issues with libraries whose PAC is limited to default to all member libraries? Do you think that there would be any concerns that Palatine's creating on order records for items that can't be purchased and other patrons can see that? Do you feel like there could potentially be issues with patrons saying, well, why can't we place a hold on this thing? Why aren't you getting it? And then pressure for those libraries to also create on order records as well?
Well, then any library certainly could do these forthcoming records and then add an item that's holdable to their patrons, I would think. There are already things in all of our catalogs that everybody can see but aren't holdable to other libraries. And if someone does say, oh, why aren't you getting this? Then that library could certainly add their own record or order it, whatever the case.
So
yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, I think that part of the discussion, we would be happy to leave that up to what works best for the group, because we were just trying to be accommodating to make sure that we're sharing our resources as much as possible. But if there was a consensus that that would actually cause more problems, we'd be happy to limit it just to our own patrons.
I kind of agree with Deborah that would, making them not holdable could create more of those issues with patrons and staff members than it would solve, because we can educate our staff to say, yes, you can place a hold on this, and educate our staff and have standards that make the cataloging easier. But once they see it in the catalog, they're going to want that now. And then, you know, I hear you saying, then we'll create our own record, and that just sounds like it's going to be messier, I guess. That's my opinion.
I have a question about if Palatine makes it just for their members and they get a huge hold list, and another library loans out to everyone, and when they add their preliminary record, when they order it, does that mean that Palatine's patrons will all jump to the top of the holds list and be able to hold from both those libraries because their hold list started building quicker?
That is an interesting, and the answer would be, it depends, and yes, I suppose, right? So if Palatine creates this forthcoming record, let's say like a year ahead of something coming out, and only have Palatine items attached, and only Palatine patrons can place holds on that records. If that record is then merged with a PDR, and all the Palatine holds move over, they'll be at the top of the queue, which means that, as always, your items will go to your own patrons first. So Grace Lake items will go to Grace Lake patrons first. However, when there are no more Grace Lake patrons in the list, you would then jump to the first patron in the queue. So you would start going down essentially the Palatine patrons prior to other card holders.
Well, and one of the things I was thinking, as you were talking about, like, those who are suggesting they'd like Palatine to only make it holdable to our patrons, I was wondering, because we do want to share our new materials philosophically, would we make it holdable only to our own patrons as a forthcoming record, but once it became an on-order record, would we flip that? Because otherwise, we're going to have some new materials that are holdable only for our patrons and some new materials that are holdable for everybody, and that's going to be more confusing to the membership. You're muted.
You're muted.
I'm muted. I said I'm in favor of making everything holdable to everyone. So I would hate to take that away from patrons, or to say like, well, you have to make your stuff holdable only to your patron. Like, that's never anything I would want to say to a library. So, and I do, Tammy, that was a really good point you brought up, because I didn't think about, like, we'd have this record with potentially a lot of Palatine holds prior to any other CCS patron actually being able to place a hold on that title. Though I suppose it's no different from some libraries who do like the forthcoming title list, and then they place like a lot of holds in bulk for patrons. I know, for example, I think like Villa does that. So it'd be somewhat similar, I suppose, to that. But speaking of holds, I did want to bring up one other issue around holds that I thought of when we were talking. So Jeannie mentioned that these titles are created sometimes up to 18 months in advance. One thing to think about is that holds currently are set to expire after 1 year in CCS. So we either need to change that, that would go to database management to say holds would expire after like 2 years or 18 months. But that would be something that libraries would need to monitor to make sure that these holds didn't like expire before the title actually came out.
I'm gonna defer to Shelby on this, but I'm gonna say that partly that 18 months was just like a fail safe. Like, after 18 months, we're absolutely sure that it's not going to be published, and we would delete them. And that was a process because we had to physically delete them. But knowing that Polaris will delete them after 12 months is actually probably not a problem, right, Shelby?
Right. I like that idea, actually.
It's actually better for us.
Mm.
It is about 10 o'clock, and I know Jeannie needs to go to her next meeting. Do we want to continue this discussion without her, or do you think you're ready to start making a decision? There's 2 decisions that needs to be made, whether to recommend that we allow Palatine to create the forthcoming records, and then the decision of what the bibliographic standards need to look like. And then this recommendation will be then sent to database management, pass, and user experience before it gets sent to governing board.
And I will say that database management is next month in November. If they feel like, yep, that's a cross-departmental group. So we have CERC staff, public service staff, directors. So we do just want another group to be able to chat about this with, some perspective from staff and other departments. If this is something we want to move forward with, Again, I think it would require an update to our bib standards, which would need to go through the whole review process again and be approved by governing board. I don't think that that needs to get approved and edited before Palatine can resume their practice of adding these forthcoming records. And SCRAP does not need to, at this meeting, decide what those standards would be in order, I think, to let Palatine continue. We just need to flesh them out, I think, within the next meeting or two. But if we can have, again, a decision here on if this group would recommend that we allow Palatine to continue that practice, I think that's what we need.
But the decision would be to allow any library to do the forthcoming records.
Yes.
So
correct.
I would kind of take Palatine then specifically out of it, because it's not just about one library doing something. It's about establishing this new type of records that anybody could add.
That's correct. Okay. Yes. Thanks for the clarification.
Do we need a motion?
Yes, that'd be great.
Sure.
Motion to allow forthcoming bib records.
Does anyone want to second the motion?
Second.
I'll second.
Can I have a name? I couldn't see who was speaking.
Sandy.
Sorry. Sandy?
And Deborah, could you say again, so if this motion is approved, then it would go to the other groups and then back to SCRAP to discuss the guidelines?
I think that at least if this is approved or recommended, if this is recommended to SCRAP, at least I want to take this to the database management next month to see, again, get additional input from staff and other departments. If the database management group also recommends that we allow forthcoming bib records in the database, I think at that point, it would go back to SCRAP to draft the amendment to the bib standards, at which point we would take that to the relevant groups for approval, and then the bib standards would need to get updated or approved by governing board. We may want to use this as an opportunity, though, to just review the entire bib standards as well to see if there's any additional updates we might want to make before taking it to governing board. I have to go back. The bib standards were voted on by CAM. We took them to pass, and then they went to governing board as well. But again, I do not think that we would need to wait for a full governing board approval of the revised bib standards before allowing Palatine to resume the practice, or anyone who would be interested.
So to approve the motion, do we want to do a voice vote, or should I just ask if anyone is against approving it?
Let's do a voice vote. It's been a while since we've done one of those.
Okay. So Sandy seconded the motion. So the next one on my list is Lynn Crembier.
Hi. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Lynn Rubio.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
What do I say? Yes.
Tammy.
Yes.
John motioned. Jamie.
Yes.
And Helga.
Yes.
Okay. So the motion is approved.
Perfect. So we'll add this to the database management agenda for next month. Shelby, Violet, I'm not sure. Actually, Violet, I believe you'll be on database management, so you'll be there to talk about this. But if Shelby wanted to come as well, just to hear the discussion, that might be helpful. So I'll follow up with you separately by email about that.
Shelby's actually retiring at the end.
Oh,
so
Shelby, congratulations.
Thanks.
Sorry to out you, Shelby, but I think there's no point in you coming to a meeting in November.
Yeah.
Oh, that's probably true. Yes. So Violet, I'll follow up with you again about that meeting. I thought Jeannie did a great job presenting today, so I might have you introduce the topic to the group.
Thank you. Now I have a better background on it. I've only been here a month, so there was a lot to catch up on. Thank you all for listening to us and understanding our plight.
And then Rachel, I think if you could draft like a sample section for the bib standards and then send it out to Scrap. That way we can start looking at this right away and then discuss in full at our next Scrap meeting.
Sure. Okay, sorry, I was just taking some notes. I do have some ideas for the bib standards. Did we want to just bring it up now to briefly discuss it, or just completely wait till the next meeting?
I think if anyone here has something while the discussion's fresh in our minds, that'd be helpful.
Because I can bring up the bib standards on the catalog wiki.
I mean, in addition to the 100s, like the 690s, I would say most of the record should be notes. It should be a title and notes.
Right. So let me bring up the preliminary data record page. Okay, so I think that's on the bib standards page instead that has all the details. So I would say that it would need to have the 099 field. And so if they don't have the ISBN or UPC, my recommendation would be to add it when ordered, when they have it. And then I would also recommend sticking with the 100 and 245 as the creator and title, anything else in notes. And I also think that it should have the word forthcoming somewhere. So I was thinking that allowing the 945 to be added to have the word forthcoming or forthcoming DVD in the record would be okay. But I have seen some records that have a 245 that have in brackets forthcoming, but I was thinking it would be better to not have it in the 245 so the title is a better match for deduplication, but to have the forthcoming note in the 945 field.
Or even the 500.
Question, does the 500 display in the list?
No.
So maybe not the 500 if it doesn't display in the list.
It doesn't display in the catalog.
Or, yeah, so if patrons aren't going to see it.
Doesn't the 500 display in the full display, but not the?
No, I mean, if you want a patron to see something prominently featured, it would need to be in one of the fields that display in the hit list. So I don't know if you can put a note in the summary, which does display. I mean, these don't necessarily have like a publisher summary, so I don't know if there's something you could put in the summary field that would indicate, again, it's for and not yet available. That would be prominently featured for a patron to see.
Summary is a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I keep forgetting I'm muted. I like the idea of the beginning of the summary in capital letters.
If it's in the summary, they wouldn't necessarily need the 945. Okay, so I think that's it. So to summarize that, again, it would be the 099, adding the ISBN or UPC when they order, moving the notes to the appropriate notes field, such as a summary that would be visible.
Yeah, and there was, I thought, an interesting discussion today about the actual item record, who it should be holdable to. And that's something we can talk to database management about as well to get their feedback on. I know that doesn't necessarily belong in our BIB standards, but if we'll offer this as a new type of record, we'll probably want to come up with some like general guidelines for if you want to take advantage of a forthcoming title.
This is Lei. Will it help if the item record in the call number has the word forthcoming, since a item record will be generated when a forthcoming bid record is created?
Yeah, that would be visible in the pack, so that could be helpful for identifying forthcoming records.
And I suppose, like, I mean, eventually, it's likely this forthcoming item record will be deleted. So I'm not quite sure we'd want to come up with like a standard for how you'd fill that record out, because Lei, when you would actually order it, then a second item record would be generated when you release the PO. So you'll have to then go back and delete the forthcoming record. So I think
sorry, but that would make it easier to identify that this is the item record that I actually need to delete.
Mm-hmm.
I
would agree with you on that.
One option for the acquisitions process is if you do a purchase order of just forthcoming records that have the forthcoming item record, you could make the choice to not generate the item records when you release the PO. And as long as you're not doing that with an EDI order, which you're not EDI ordering yet, that wouldn't cause any problems, I believe, with the purchase order process or acquisition process.
That's correct. But I guess the thing is, I'm creating one forthcoming item record, but when I order, I'm ordering like 10 DVDs.
Okay, right.
So really, if I know I'm ordering that forthcoming record and I can identify that one item record with the call number of forthcoming, I think it's just easier that way. It's suggestion-wise.
I would agree that would be helpful for the library if they wanted to do that, but we don't typically standardize parts of the item record. That's usually up to the library and what works best for their workflow. So maybe we just don't even bother trying to require something in the item record.
Okay.
So you're saying that we could do it as Palatine, but nobody else would be required to do it?
Yes. Okay, is there anything else about the forthcoming records, or can we move on to the next agenda item? Okay, let's move on to the LCGFT Novels of Manners and the local heading Regency Fiction. Sandra and Lynn brought the topic to PASS, and she had a really good PowerPoint presentation that they presented at PASS. Would you like to report on the outcome of the PASS meeting?
Sure. This is Lynn. We presented to PASS. They asked some questions, but the outcome was that they would like us to continue using both. Would you say that's pretty much what happened, Sandra?
Yes.
Am I missing?
Yes, so they discussed it and recommended to use both Novels of Manners and Regency Fiction. So our action item is to decide if we are okay with recommending using both and to bring the recommendation to CAM for approval.
think we already should be using both, right? There's no change that really needs to be made. Maybe just a reminder to Cam that Novels of Manners is available, and if appropriate, should be added to the record.
I think not everybody knows that Novels of Manners is available because I don't see it as often as I see Regency fiction.
It seems to me like it's harder to define. I wouldn't know when to add it unless it said so in the summary. That's maybe why there aren't as many.
So would we like to have Lynn or Sandra do a presentation at CAM on the subject headings to educate everyone on the topic and explain that both can be added?
I think that would be helpful.
I will say Lynn and Sandy did a fabulous job presenting at PASS, so I highly recommend their presentation skills. So I think that Cam would benefit from having them speak on it if they agree.
Lynn did most of the speaking and she had the PowerPoint presentation, so I mean, unless she objects, I will continue to let her take the lead on it.
I don't object. I can do that. That's fine. But you have to remember the very clever way that you sort of summed everything up at the end, Sandy. Sandra, how's that? Okay?
Deal.
Deal.
Okay, great. So is there anything else that we need to discuss on this, or should we move on to the next agenda item? Okay, so the next item is to decide on what the edition statement should look like for Wonder Books and Vox Books and bring that to CAM for a recommendation. So when I looked at the records, it looked like there was no consistent way of doing it. There were many records without an edition statement, some that just said Wonder Books and Vox Books, some that had the brackets with audio and book in the brackets. So then there was an email in the discussion that Jamie sent wondering if we had ever made a decision, I believe, on how it should appear. So what are your thoughts on how the edition statement should appear and what we should recommend to CAM?
Can we see examples in the catalog?
Sure.
You mean in the pack, John, or?
Yes, but this is good too.
Okay.
Because my first question is going to be, my first question is, why do we need an edition statement? And so I want to see what these look like.
The issue for me was, and I think when we discussed it before, mainly in the pack, because the Tom is audiobook, so it's not super clear that it is actually a book with audio.
Got it.
Well, here's one. It has no edition. So this is one, but this one has no edition statement. So it might take me a while to find the one with an edition statement. So let me see. I could probably try a SQL query. It's taking a long time to do the SQL query. Let's see.
Truncation at both ends always takes a long time. No records.
Not finding it.
So I found one. Do you want a control number?
Yes, that would be easier. 1 second.
Okay, the control number is 210-7783.
Okay, here's one. It has Wonderbook with the book and audio in the brackets. And the pack view.
Is that icon for audiobooks?
Yes, audiobooks.
Just to refresh my memory, I think I just brought this up recently, the issue of the book and the audio, right? This does not, there is no icon.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think the 250 really helps that out because of that lack of icon.
Okay, so that was the original suggestion of what to include in the wiki was book plus audio. So is everyone okay with this being the standard? There have been some discussion on removing the brackets, but it does seem to be helpful to know what the item actually is.
Do we need to repeat the publisher in the 250?
You want to include the publisher in the 250?
It seems like book plus audio accurately describes it. I don't know, is the publisher important?
You can take Wonderbook out and just say book plus audio?
Yeah, is that enough?
Well, Vox Edition does kind of look just like it is an edition statement. So someone would probably put that in the 250 anyway, if they saw it.
I assume that this is a mess in OCLC.
Many of them don't have edition statements at all.
I like it how it is here on the screen. I'm fine with that.
Do we need to do a motion to approve this specific edition statement or just accept it as it is?
Could we have a minimum standard for it? Just so that we're not oh, what do I want to say? Like sort of accept what's in OCLC if it's accurate, and not worry about whether there's brackets or periods or the word addition, or include at least this information.
So what information are you suggesting?
I don't know. I mean, book plus audio, certainly.
Okay.
Does Vox and Wonderbook work the same way? Do you need to have it in there to make a distinction, or do they both basically work the same?
From the website, it sounds like they work the same way.
They do the same way.
Okay.
They may, because they may have different like educational prompts, perhaps. I'm not sure, because I know I saw that some said that they have like questions for the child to think about, so it's possible that could be different.
How about sorry.
Oh.
How about an addition statement that says something like, then record an addition statement that indicates book plus audio? And then, like John said, if something similar is already there, you can leave it.
Because it sounds like the reason we're doing this is that we're essentially creating a new tome. We're creating a new icon. And so add the information that is missing from the icon.
Well, also, it is a proper addition statement. If the word Wonderbook is on there, it is a different form version of the resource. That is an addition, right? It's the Wonderbook edition of the book. Yeah. Right?
Right.
Sure.
John?
I just don't want us to argue about, punctuation and things that are necessary don't help the cause.
Okay, so I could update this addition statement to remove the examples, but just state to record the type of device you are cataloging as part of the addition statement by including book plus audio in brackets. Does that sound acceptable?
And is that just for these two types? What is, I'm sorry, what is this? This is in the wiki under a discussion of these types of materials, right?
Yes, this is specifically for Wonder Books and Box Books.
Okay. I don't have a problem with the way it is, but I see I can certainly be swayed to what John's saying, that it just should be book and audio. Although, if Vox Edition is spelled out on the material, somebody's going to do that. I don't know that matters.
It should be at least, yes, it should be at least book plus
book
audio.
and audio, yeah, okay.
If there's an addition statement, obviously, record the addition statement. I don't think we need to say that on this page. That's cataloging.
Okay.
Okay. All right, I can update that and then send that out to the email list. Is there anything else, or can we move on to the next topic? Okay, so the next topic I added was a continued discussion from the email list on serials, the 006, and if we needed to decide if that should be added to the wiki so that everyone can be reminded that the 006 needs to be added so that the TOM for periodical is displayed. And also if CCS should regularly check for the issue and correct it as a bulk change. Jamie, did you have anything else you wanted to bring up on the topic?
Not really on the first one. I think we should add it to the wiki. And could CCS make this change regularly so we didn't have to think about it for the first one there?
Yeah, I'm okay with adding that to our list.
Okay.
Of things to bulk change. Virginia has been doing a lot of bulk changes for issues similar to that. Virginia, are you okay with adding that to the list of bulk changes that we do?
Yeah, that's fine. How often? 6 months? A month, maybe? Monthly?
Sounds great to me.
I think every 6 months or a year would be okay. I don't think new bibliographic records are added very frequently.
Okay. I'll do a, okay, around 6 months. It might be a couple months earlier, who knows? Okay.
And then for the second one, it was, if we are going to continue doing that workaround, then that should also be added to the wiki. But I was also wondering if, since we had several new libraries, if we decided to do that, if we should revisit it and make sure it's something we want to continue. I don't know if people want to go over that again or not, or just keep doing it.
I think we do the workaround so that the holds work properly, as I remember. That's why we do the workaround.
So without the workaround, it's just item holds that are placed in the pack for serials. So the workaround allows volume holds.
Okay, so it sounds like we do need to continue using the 006 for periodicals, and that we should add it to the wiki. I will go ahead and figure out how to add it to the wiki and send it out to the listserv.
And so did any of the newer libraries, Indian Trails or Palatine, or anybody have any thoughts on that, the workaround on that second point there, that for serial records, they display in the catalog as book and not serial? Are there any concerns with that?
I mean, yes, I would like the type of material to reflect the actual legit material type.
Yeah, I second that it just kind of makes sense that it can be very confusing.
I think it is confusing too for staff. If you see a title like Guinness Book of Records and the date it shows is the first date that it was published. So it says Guinness Book of Records 1970. Well, that if it says book, then it looks like that's the 1970 edition, but it's actually the serial record that started in 1970. So if you don't have that serial indicator, it's not clear what you're looking at. And I think it does make the catalog harder to use.
I don't think the date appears in the catalog.
For serials?
Yeah. I don't think.
Right, but it does for books. So when we change it to book.
Yes, okay. Yeah.
They're seeing a date. I don't know if we want it to go anywhere beyond this group other than just hearing that not everyone thinks it's a great idea, and maybe we just say okay and move on. I don't know.
Should we look at our record? Oh, let's see. I didn't type that right. Oh, it's been a while since I've looked at the Guinness Book of World Records to see how Guinness is spelled. So I see this one does have a date here under the book, Tom. Is that what you mean?
Right.
Yeah.
But the date, it says 2000. So it looks
Right.
like we just own, in the hit list, it looks like we just own the 2000 volume there. It says book, it doesn't say it's a serial.
But there is a picture that says 2021 right above it.
Well, that's true. That doesn't really help. I think it might only confuse things.
I think, you know, everybody knows I'm out of step, Charlie, with our policy on serials. I'd just be concerned about if we're heading towards getting rid of all serials, that would be recataloging reference books that we keep for 100 years that are, there's going to be no holds anyway.
I'm not sure I understand what the problem is with the holds and how the book Tom versus the serial Tom would affect the holds.
My understanding is when it's cataloged as a serial, Polaris is expecting the volume information to be in the designation, not in the volume field of the call number.
Okay.
So when it doesn't have that designation information for a serial like this, that's not a magazine, then when someone tries to place a hold, it only places item level hold. So if you try to, if this is a serial, then when I went in and tried to place a hold on the 2021, it would only place a hold on that particular item rather than all the 2021 in the system.
Okay.
It is hard to explain, and it is a flaw in Polaris. Okay, this is not something that's supposed to happen. The easiest way to see it is just to change this back to serial, and then go into the pack and try to place a hold, and you'll see what happens. It only places a hold on that particular item,
Okay.
which isn't typically what we want to do.
So it sounds like we cannot change it though, because that would not allow holds to be created properly, and that we do have to
created properly, but you know, you'd have to decide if it's one evil versus the other. It's this, or if we change it back to serial, people would be placing item level holds. My argument is placing a hold on that particular item such a bad thing? I thought it was something that we could work with, but that's not what was decided.
well, it's up to all of you, and it doesn't have to be my decision. So workflow-wise, my recommendation would be continuing with the current process. Other libraries may want to take the time to move the dates to the volume field to make it more accessible to holds if we switch it, and that would take a lot of time.
I don't think
because these are serial. I'm sorry, go ahead, John.
No, I don't think that's possible, because I think only the serials check-in can populate the issue field. If we were all checking in all our travel guides, then it wouldn't be an issue, but I'm not suggesting that.
Well, what happens with the serials module is that if a library uses it, it actually looks differently in the pack. We have libraries that use both the item records and the serial holdings records at the same time. And so you can actually see which ones those are, because you see two different issue statements next to each other, and it will be repetitive. So it does look differently when you use the serial holdings record.
I think the main thing for me was just making sure that everybody was aware that we were doing this. So maybe we could just, all be aware of it, remind Kim, and if the newer libraries want to think about it and look at it, see how it works, and then bring it up at the next meeting to look at, we could do that.
If we switched this record back to serial and placed a hold, which item would it pick?
Whichever item, you have to go down into the item list and select a particular, you'd have to click on one of those, and that's the item that you would get.
I see. So you would be picking, you would get the right volume, but it would be most likely your libraries, which might not be the best choice. Okay. Yeah, maybe that's not so bad. I don't know.
Okay, so for now, I will make sure all of the information is clear on the catalog wiki, and we can add the discussion to the next CAM agenda. Does that sound all right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. So next is the issue of encoding levels in records and the settings of the import profile that Brad had emailed us about. Brad, would you like to discuss the topic?
Sure. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The issue came up sometime last year that I noticed that some of the records I already worked on, the work had been wiped away after another library had placed an order. And looking into it, I talked with Virginia, and the solution she suggested was to change the encoding level to I to stop that from happening. And since then, it's worked. Looking into it further, the issue is that Evanston has in their duplicate detection field for their enriched EDI order import profile, it says if duplicates are found, enforce encoding level restrictions, and the template to copy does not have that. So that's where the problem's coming from. And the solution was to change it instead of having Evanston, because I don't know if it was possible for them to change it or not, but that was the workaround at this time.
So currently the wiki does not specify what encoding level anyone should use. So the question is if the wiki should include that as a BIB standard, and if we should also include requirements on what import profile settings for deduplication should be used for different types of records, like on order records and vendor records.
So is this an issue for all the libraries who are getting their final records from the vendors? Because the vendor, those import profiles, they save the record with the highest encoding level. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, as long as it's above I, it's fine. But if it's below I, it will override it. So if it's an 8 or an M or a partial record, it will overwrite. And that will overwrite everything. Any changes you've made to 245s, 490s, cleaning up anything, genre stuff, it's all gone.
But it would overwrite it with the current full level OCLC record, is that right?
Yeah, it will override it with whatever the vendor puts in. And sometimes that's not correct. Like one of the issues is if we have a current naming format for a title that's different than maybe what OCLC or the vendor hat uses, we might have already changed it, but then all that's backed and we have two different ways of having a title appear in our records, and it's kind of, we lose that. And in theory, it'd all be correct, but it's not always correct coming from the vendor, because it's the vendor doing the cataloging, not just OCLC.
Is it overwriting only preliminary records?
No, if you have a finished record that's final, it will overwrite it.
Huh. That's news.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yikes.
But
This
the
was
vendors are what they're overlaying with should be OCLC records. Is that not correct?
I maybe it should only be OCLC, but I had found it at the time. I don't have those records because they're long since changed, but there were ones that were in OCLC, and then the version was different because the vendor doesn't always use the same OCLC. There are multiple OCLC records sometimes for the same title.
And when they do use customized library services for their cataloging records, Baker and Taylor will use the OCLC record, but not save it back to OCLC. So it's conceivable that someone else will edit that record in a different way.
This is a
Vendor
workaround.
records should never be considered final.
It's not the vendor records, it's the final records that Evanston or Indian Trails uses as their final records from the vendor, because they have subscribed
Vendor
to
cataloging.
vendor cataloging for customized library services.
Okay, I guess I should clarify that and say records that are not checked by CCS libraries should not be final.
Could maybe, I think is Sandy the only one in here from a library who uses this service? Do the libraries who use this typically look at all the records, or aren't you just taking the vendor record? They're saying it's the final full record and you just load that? I don't know how it works. Or does anyone know, the libraries who are doing this, do they look at every record?
Evanston, oh, go ahead, Sandy.
Speaking personally for us, yes, I check all the records that they send us because they're of highly variable quality. We check the genre headings for fiction. We check the call numbers they send us for nonfiction. And for some reason, I have noticed that if there are multiple records available in OCLC for a title, CLS will invariably pick the worst one and send us that.
Is there some expectation that they are following CCS standards, though, in the records they send you?
We do have a profile set up. It is supposed to be in line with CCS standards. What we expect and what they send us don't always align.
Okay. And does anyone know if the other libraries like Evanston, are they examining every record they get?
Evanston doesn't examine because of the amount of material they get. Evanston does not. They only check a few records in a batch because they don't have enough staff to check every record, and they have lots of records coming in.
Sorry, go ahead, John.
Oh no, that needs to stop. That can't be. Sort of oversimplifying things there, but that at that point we're just letting vendors catalog and wiping out the stuff that we've already done. And we bring in level 8 records all the time, and they're perfectly fine.
So then, so maybe it would be a good idea to do what Fred's suggesting, and when a CCS library says this is the final record, change the encoding level to blank or whatever, and then nothing would overwrite it. Your macro could do this, right?
Yes.
So it might not be such a big deal.
Boy.
It would be overwriting.
Jeez.
If we're saying it's full, then is there any problem with that?
Well, I mean,
not everybody uses the macro. I mean, it's you know, no effort for me, but, or you, but.
Well, I mean,
I do use.
Some people might also be okay with their record being overwritten. So if they are, then they could leave whatever's there. Sorry, Sandy, go ahead.
Sorry, because we're basically talking about, you know, unexamined CLS records overlaying something that has already been checked and edited in our catalog. I would only bring in an OCLC record if there was a, you know, preliminary data record. If we're talking about doing this with CLS records, then we're either going to have to change our CLS profile, or we'll have to manually change every CLS record that we look at to change the encoding level to make sure that Evanston doesn't overlay it in the future.
And that's what I do. I change every record manually to make sure after I've looked at it, I change it to an I if it's not already final or full.
It sounds like it'll be a lot less work to have Evanston change their import profile.
That would be the case, but.
Well, so what would Evanston change their profile to? That it would still work for them.
All they really have to do is for duplicate detection, take out if duplicates are found, enforce encoding level restrictions. And it should be fine. I believe it should be fine, but that's what I think is causing the problem.
So you want them to change the profile to, if a duplicate is found, do not overlay?
Well, if duplicates are found, overlay single duplicate, but don't enforce encoding level restrictions. It's the encoding level restrictions that if it's less than an I, it overlays. But if it's a duplicate, yeah.
If you don't have the encoding level restriction, then it would overlay everything.
Well, okay, their full thing is if duplicates are found, enforce encoding level restrictions. If encoding levels match, reject incoming records. So yeah, maybe I guess it would overlay it. If it is a duplicate, it would overlay it no matter what. So maybe it would need to be changed more than that, but there has to be something that has to be changed because.
Should I bring up an import profile so that we can take a look at it?
Yeah, bring up Evanston.
Vendors shouldn't be overlaying any record.
Okay, let me see if I can find an Evanston profile.
Preliminary record.
Do all.
Yeah, it's the third.
Okay, 10 would be fine too. OCLC full records. Oh, and
so they have save record with highest encoding level. If encoding levels match, reject incoming record.
So on the work that Brad is doing, is he upgrading in Polaris, or I should say, are you upgrading in Polaris a lower encoded record and you're not upgrading in OCLC and then bringing that record in with a higher encoding level?
Correct. I don't work in OCLC. If that needs to be done, it goes to Linda Kahn to go into OCLC.
I mean, so that's part of the issue. Wouldn't that be part of the issue? Because if the CLS record is bringing in an OCLC record with a higher encoding level, even if it doesn't match the quality of cataloging, I mean, because you're only upgrading the record locally. Is that, am I missing something? Isn't that part of the issue? I'm not suggesting one thing one way or the other. I'm just trying to work through the.
Yes, we're upgrading the local record. You're correct.
Yeah.
If we had to upgrade the OCLC record, that would be impossible to do because we'd only have 2 people here. But
yeah, no, like I said, I'm not suggesting one thing or another. I'm just trying to confirm.
Yeah.
Get it.
I see your point, though.
Yeah.
Do provisional records appear in the catalog?
As As long as there's an item record attached, they should appear in the catalog.
But usually provisionals don't have the item record.
Well, but I'm saying for this, in this, I'm pointing and you can't see, but we're coding level, and then underneath it, instead of reject incoming record, how about save as provisional duplicates?
Oh, you mean, sorry, I'm getting preliminary and provisional mixed up. So the provisional record would not be indexed, so you wouldn't be able to actually search for it. But if they do save it as provisional, it would require a lot more manual work.
Okay,
so,
but not for me, which is the important part, or Brad.
Right.
He's not causing the problem.
So I would not recommend using save an incoming record as provisional. And so I would say that their choice would be either to continue using the highest encoding level or to reject the incoming record and add the mark retention tags to the database record.
Yeah, reject would be good too.
I think that Brad's saying too, he doesn't have a problem with changing the encoding level to be full when he's cataloging in Polaris. He's just suggesting that everybody might want to do that if we don't want our full records overwritten.
Yeah, I don't have the biggest issue with it. It's just that's the workaround. If other people don't want their stuff overwritten, they can change it, and if they don't care, they can leave it.
I care, but I really don't want to have to change the encoding level on every single thing.
I don't want to have to do extra work. Yeah. I'm kind of horrified that this has been going on and I didn't know. It's also a case for doing your work in OCLC so that things can be recovered. But I don't know how much of my work has been overwritten by Evanston's records.
It is a little scary, isn't it?
Yes. And I don't want to have to do extra work.
Right.
For, no offense to Evanston, we're glad to have you, but you're causing this problem. You have to do a workaround that for this problem that kind of doesn't need to exist.
So instead of changing the requirement, I could just do a presentation at CAM explaining it and then let everyone decide what they would want to do themselves. Or do you feel that we should change the requirements of either the import profiles or the records?
Well, at minimum, I mean, I think we do need to let everyone know, since, I mean, we weren't aware of it then. Most libraries aren't aware of it. I mean, we do need to, at minimum, bring that up so that people have the option. It would be nice to change the profile, to have a standard for the profile, but I don't know how that's going to be received.
Well, we could.
Plus, it's still going on, and I don't.
You're breaking up, sorry.
The problem is still going on, and I don't know how we identify which records have been changed.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, for us, it's just like hit or miss. You might go back and check or do something, and then you're like, hey, what happened? And that's kind of how Brad found it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we can do a query for all of the details of who actually updates a record and when. We have the import overlay date and the name of the last person that updated a record, but I'm not sure if the database records all of the details and saves it behind the scenes.
probably don't want that report anyway, John.
Right.
We need to just move forward if we can.
Sure.
Okay, we can bring the discussion up at the next CAM meeting and put it off for making any decisions on recommendations until then? Or would you like to discuss it a bit more now and make a motion on how to proceed?
Is there a quick change to the profile that we could make that would satisfy Evanston?
I'm not sure if it would satisfy Evanston, but the change would be to reject the record if it's a duplicate and add the retention tags to the record. So it might not be something they'd want to do.
No, because then they wouldn't be able to overlay their own PDR. I mean, they'd have to do it manually because they would all be rejected.
So it sounds like the option would be then to just change the encoding level of the records and continue to use the import profile based on the encoding level.
I think it sounds good to bring it up to CAM and just discuss it there.
Okay.
I think so too.
Okay,
And this
we'll
was
just...
Also, you know, the OC is going to be changing the encoding levels at some point. Just by the way.
Well, I knew they were changing the levels because of the new RDA standards and PCC, because PCC is removing the requirement to use periods. But I didn't know that that's the bibliographic or standards for A or I, whether it's A, CR2 or RDA or blank. So that one I think was going to be changed.
I'll see if I can find the OCLC sent out it was in a technical bulletin or something, or I don't know. I'll see if I can find it, email it to the group.
All right, so I'll do a presentation at the next CAM meeting explaining the topic, and we'll move the discussion to CAM. So the next thing on the agenda was, does the L still need to be removed from the Lexile code in Polaris? So Brad did have that question. I did some research and discovered that it does not matter whether the L is there or not. The facet for the Lexile's code works regardless of how it appears. So the question is if we should update the wiki or just leave it as is. Right now it says to delete the L, but that's not necessary anymore.
Okay. Take it out.
So we could take out that whole page or just leave it there for posterity and mark it as obsolete.
Okay.
Removing the L is extra work, so I'd be okay with just considering it an obsolete page and letting people know they don't have to remove the L anymore. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
That sounds good to me.
Whichever's the least work.
Is there anything else on this page that's of any use? We could just delete it.
It explains what the codes are, but that has nothing to do with the standards of the CCS database.
The one
Right.
thing it does show how to format it with the 528.8 space, and then how to do it at least that much, because I have seen people not even put the 528.8, which if that doesn't matter, that's fine. But it was one thing for just showing how to at least start doing it.
Well, it does say that the Lexile codes come in from Marchive, but sometimes they're in OCLCs, though the problem is how they're formatted previously and if they should be reviewed if they're in the OCLC record and corrected.
I manually check for at least the youth fiction that I do if there is a code, because I have to write it in the top corner, because that's what our youth librarians want. So I look if it's not in the OCLC when I bring it in, then I will check on the website and see if it is available. So that's why the L was the thing I needed to know. Should I put it in? Do I need to take it out if I see it in there? So like I just wanted some uniformity. Because otherwise we'd have two lines, one thing A80L, because the Mark uploading will put in a new one if I only put in like 880. And then B Lexile, it will put in another one if it doesn't have an L in it.
So Rachel or Virginia, all those examples there in the left column, what's in WorldCat, all those would work fine in the Facet and GARPAC, is that right?
I haven't found any examples yet where it doesn't have the subfield B in it, so I'm not sure how it would affect it if the subfield B is missing.
Okay, if there are any requirements at all for the Facet to work right, I think we'd want to have that on this page. If Brad and perhaps others are adding this locally.
Okay, so I could just remove the requirement to delete the L.
And reference to workflows.
And the reference to workflows, yes. And just make a statement that it should be formatted with the word Lexile and the subfield B.
If Marchive is supplying these, can they also, oh, you're only sending new stuff. Never mind.
Now, we sent a long time ago, the whole database, I forget how many years ago, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, to do it and fix it. But now they just currently do the stuff that we send them to. Probably send another batch in next month or so. We could do another reclamation, but I suppose that gets expensive. I'm not sure how much.
Yeah. I don't think we need to send the whole database to Marchive for a reclamation, as long as you've been maintaining it since then. So I think the question is really just whether we should update this to remove the portion that requires the L to be deleted. Which I'm okay with, because I don't think anyone really needs to do the extra work.
Yeah, I mean, if we don't need to do it, let's take it out so people that are referring to this don't think they have to.
Okay. And then I can just make an announcement at the next CAM meeting. Is there anything else on this topic? Okay, so Helga brought up in the email list the idea of creating guidelines for merging duplicates. And this is something that we could potentially add to the wiki page. And so one thing I was thinking of would be like the issues of adding ISBNs from one record to another, checking to make sure that there aren't any extra records that have the ISBNs in them that shouldn't have them, and so forth. Are there any other ideas on what should be included in merging guidelines?
I brought this up just because I mean, basically when we came on board, it was like, you can merge records. Okay. And needless to say, we were a little intimidated by doing that. And, you know, even just looking to the wiki to gain some confidence in what I was doing, I realized there wasn't anything. And I'm not even sure what I would recommend, because frankly, I'm not 100% sure what I don't know. You know, I'm very cautious, mainly because of that. But yeah, I guess I'm not 100% sure of what I don't know.
Right. So there are the videos on the new e-learning page, but I haven't gone through them to create better instructional documents yet. So it's possible that we don't need to add it necessarily to the wiki, and I just need to create better instructional documents for those videos. And then I'd be able to include better guidelines on how to handle ISBN issues and multi-volume set records and things like that.
I would kind of prefer it to be in the wiki, because the wiki is easier to search, and it's the first place I look for cataloging guidelines anyway.
Okay.
I mean, it can refer back. It can also include, I mean, a referral to the video, obviously, but I would agree with Sandy on that.
You could put in the wiki and then put a link back to your, you know, to your instructional documents too.
Okay. So I can go ahead and start working on the merging guidelines for the wiki while I work on the documents for the training course. So I know when I started, I wasn't given specific guidelines on deduplicating, other than making sure that they're an exact match. So I know that what's come up when I've done it are like ISBN issues and multi-volume set records, but I'm not sure if there's any other issues that anyone else has come up with while trying to deduplicate. I know other things could be like watching for the different Blu-ray types, like the 4K Blu-ray, and making sure that that's not on the same record as a regular Blu-ray, things like that.
Details of special features, because sometimes you have two discs that you swear are utterly identical, but it turns out they have different special features. For graphic novels, I like checking the note that says which specific issues have been, you know, concatenated in this particular edition, because for older popular titles like Sandman, where we have a million editions that all say they're Sandman Volume 1, but contain different individual issues bound together, that really prevents accidental merging if, you know, there's a statement in there that says which individual issues are in there, because otherwise they wind up looking exactly alike.
Okay. One thing I've also noticed when working on the Palatine and Grays Lake records is that at times I've found the same OCLC number used for different items, like one would have 2 DVDs and the other would have 1 DVD, but they'd still have the same OCLC number. But that's possibly a different bib standard issue that needs to be maybe discussed as a reminder at CAM. So that those records have separate OCLC numbers. But in the case of merging duplicates, would we want those to be dealt with separately and have the library look at those to make sure that they're using a record that's a different OCLC number that's not in the system? So if there's nothing else on this, I can go ahead and just start working on a wiki page and we can move on to the next topic because it's already 11:15. So the next topic is the issue of what topics belong on the catalog wiki versus other websites, and the creation of guidelines. So one thing that we might want to do on this is work on this over a bit more, over a longer period of time, and wait to see if the website design project is, I'm sorry, I was just thinking of something else. So we could wait to see if Kathleen has ideas on the website design project and how the catalog wiki should be connected to that, or if you wanted to discuss the guidelines now.
I've been sort of tilting at this windmill for 30 years. In my mind, our manual should be local practices and not much else. In a perfect world, it would be a laminated card. We're not going to get there. But historically, our manual was 300 pages, and it was a mix of policies and guidelines and sample records and this and that and whatever. And we still have not gotten rid of all that stuff, or at least moved it somewhere else. So that's where my head is at, both on point 8 on the agenda and point 9. That's the way I see it. I don't know how the rest of the group does, but
I've seen some pages that have only national standards on them. So would you be saying that you'd want to even remove pages that just have national standards?
yes. Do you have an example?
Let's see.
Our issue with that was we didn't want to keep a list of something where it exists somewhere else and we could just link to it.
Right.
Because then someone has to keep checking to make sure that we're up to date.
I don't remember what the page was.
Well, there's...
Maybe there are things like rules reminders. There's like the RDA cheat sheet.
And I know there are some, I should say, in addition to local practices, we have recorded things that are difficult to interpret based on all of the various bodies that make these decisions. And so in some cases, that would be okay.
Well, that fits though in what you're saying, John, because then you're saying that it's like the local interpretation of this amalgamation of recommendations, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so that does still fit in what you're suggesting.
CCS rule interpretations.
Yeah. Because we can.
Right. And also I see this document is, yes, we all refer to it, but it's also for new libraries and new catalogers. This is how we do it. You know, and we used to have the tables like, well, here's what the indicators mean for the 245. No, that's somewhere else. Something other documents can take care of that. We got rid of it.
And then there were I know this is in the suggested edits in the pages for review. There was the page that had images, like literary form. These are more educational and can be in a training website.
Yes.
It doesn't necessarily need to be.
No, yeah.
And also this, our manual here is on a public website. So we do have to be a little bit careful about what's out there. I know I asked about, are we allowed to have screenshots from proprietary software? It probably doesn't matter, but is it good form to be putting that out to the public? I don't know.
Well, we do have plenty of videos on YouTube and haven't been chastised for that. So I think if these images like this are on the wiki, they wouldn't be noticed. So I don't think that's so much of an issue as opposed to just deciding whether this just belongs on a separate page for the e-learning course. So do we want to actually draft a document stating these guidelines, or just spend more time reviewing the wiki and actually pulling pages out that are unnecessary, which I know John has already been doing, but at one point I heard there was a task force to review the wiki. So an option would be not to just have John go through the whole wiki on his own, but to create a task force to do so.
I did look at every page, not that, but that's just me. If others want to do that, that's fine. And I things that I marked under review, I did not make any judgments. There are things that I think we need to talk about.
Okay.
So, I mean, whatever.
I mean, guidelines seem maybe a little bit overkill, but I mean, it may be just an issue of having a brief sort of like mission statement for what this document is, and just saying that it is what John was saying. I mean, local guidance, and if there's a need to have some kind of local interpretation of a national standard, but otherwise the expectation as a cataloger, you know where to find that kind of information at other sources, and we're not recreating.
You know where to find it.
Yeah, which, I mean, the purpose is already there, right?
Right, we have the purpose, but it's always possible to edit it if you want to add more details.
Yeah, I guess I was saying I'm not sure that it needs more details. It's maybe just that the actual site kind of grew, and it's just a matter of removing a few more things or something. I mean, it is a wiki. Can anybody just jump in, or is the expectation that it's going through CAM and?
I believe the expectation is that it's going through SCRAP first, and not everyone actually has an account to log into it to update it. Creating an actual document is not necessary, but I guess this really does just go along with the next and last agenda item, is really just the pages for review and suggested edits. So maybe that's really all we need to do on this topic, is just to go through those. And maybe there's nothing else that really needs to be removed if John's gone through it all and hasn't really found anything else.
Again, I welcome everybody to look at it, and you know, I've kind of taken the lead on it because, like I said, this has been a lifelong. I look at any page and say, hey.
So we've got a number of pages to review. It's nearly 11:30, so I'm not sure how long you want to continue to go. We could put this off for the next meeting or start to review some of these now. So Helga does have to leave for another meeting.
Would it be possible to have a separate meeting that just kind of looks at the wiki? Maybe
Sure, we could schedule a separate.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
For an hour?
Yeah.
Or less? For anyone who's interested, maybe, because I assume there are people on this meeting who find this pedantic and not interesting. So maybe for the ones who are actually interested, we could look at it.
I think that's a great idea.
Sure, we could start by going through each of these pages under review and move this to the next meeting. So how soon would you want to do that? I know I'm going to be out the last week of October. So would we want to do it as soon as next week or move it to the first week of November?
I'm off the next 2 weeks.
Okay, so we'll want to move the next meeting till November. And we do have, let's see.
Cut scrap. I mean, that's correct.
Cam.
Maybe you could send out a poll with some days that work for you in the first couple weeks of November.
Yes. So would we want this to just be scrap members or announce it to everyone at the CATS listserv?
Maybe just scrap.
Okay.
We were going to do it at this meeting anyway. I don't care though.
Okay. Well, we can make the meeting public too, since it's kind of like an extension of this meeting anyway. So for the agenda for this meeting, we'd want to just review these pages. Would we want to discuss more than just these specific pages that are under review?
If anybody has another page they want under review, just send it to the list and we'll just add it to that list.
Okay. Is there anything else? Or are we ready to adjourn the meeting?
I was just gonna ask about the OCLC do not set. Is that just gonna be discussed later? I don't know where that was left. About whether we actually need the field or if we should change the term to something else.
Well, it looks like the information is accurate on the wiki, which says that they only need OCLC do not set on the records for local items. It does not say to add it to the preliminary data records. So I think a lot of people are still under the impression that it is needed in the preliminary data records, even though it isn't. So we could just do an update at CAM and acquisitions, just as a reminder. But I think if it's still in the preliminary data records, it's not really a problem at all. It was just confusing to some of the librarians at Palatine or Grace Lake. I don't remember who brought it up because they didn't see it in the wiki.
But didn't we also find out that the field is not what is used for setting OCLC holdings?
It's not used for setting OCLC holdings and is removed, but Virginia does use it when she's creating record sets for Marchive. So it should still be in the records for local materials.
So we might at least make it clear to CAM that even though it says OCLC do not set, Bob is using different criteria from the item record to determine what gets OCLC holdings set. Because some people might have a book, for example, that they, for whatever reason, add the 945 to, but it's still going to get OCLC holdings, right? Regardless of the 945. If it's a book.
If it has an OCLC number in the record, it will get the holding set.
We just want to make sure people know what the field is doing and not doing.
Right. So Bob is open to adding the OCLC 945 field to the records he sends to Project OHM. It is possible for us to change that criteria if that's necessary. Or we could find a way to do a SQL query to see if there are any books with 945 do not set in it that are not on order records, and do a study of it first to see if it affects anything.
Okay.
I would challenge us to find a way to not need this at all. I know that when you send files, they count the records, but if a record doesn't have an OCLC number, it's not an OCLC record.
Right.
We shouldn't be, this is the keeping two lists problem. We in a perfect world, we shouldn't have to do this at all. And I would hope that we could figure out that would be our goal. I'm just saying.
Maybe we could discuss it further at the next meeting.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'll see if Bob can put together a query to see if there's anything that's get holding set on book items that have the 945 in it.
There could be, because somebody might have a local history book that they don't, that has an OCLC number, but they, for some reason, they don't want to show it to OCLC. Who knows?
Okay.
Then they should just take the OCLC number out of the.
Yeah, you would think so, yeah.
Or we should just encourage them to add the OCLC holding.
Yes.
Exactly.
Right. We send our reference books to OCLC to add our holdings. Not everything is loanable, so it's fine.
Okay. All right, so if there's nothing else, we will schedule another meeting based on a poll for November to discuss the wiki pages, and can adjourn the meeting.
Motion to adjourn if we need that.
Anyone want to second the motion?
I second the motion.
Okay. Let's adjourn the meeting.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.